Hello and welcome everyone to the Lunchtime Discovery Series. You've made it, you're here. We've got a fabulous show for you today. I am your host for the series every week, Wednesdays at noon. My name is Chris Smith, and I work here at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. The Lunchtime Discovery Series is broadcast to you by us here at the museum, but it's organized and hosted by the Office of Environmental Education within the Department of Environmental Quality as well, DEQ. So it's great to have everybody with us, our partners in the EE office, folks here at the museum, and all of you tuning in on YouTube and on Facebook. Wherever you're watching from, know that the Lunchtime Discovery Series is a participatory program. We want to know your questions, thoughts, comments. You can leave those in the chat if you're watching on YouTube and in the comments thread if you're watching on Facebook. Throughout today's program, we'll actually be taking your questions. So make sure that as you're taking in today's panel discussion, you're leaving your thoughts, experiences, and your questions for our guests in the chat so that I can go back, pull those, and pose those to today's guests. I hope that you enjoyed today's show. Now, since September 15th, we've been celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month as proclaimed by the governor of North Carolina. And so today we have a very special program for you. Today is our Hispanic and Latinx Leaders in STEM panel discussion. And to lead this discussion and bring you today's program, I actually want to introduce you to someone very special to us here at the museum, Gabriella Hogue. Gabriella is the collections manager for ichthyology, or you could say Gabriella is the queen of the fishes here at the Museum of Natural Sciences. Gabriella, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much, Chris, for that introduction. That was awesome. Yes, I am privileged to work here at the Museum of Natural Sciences and have been here for a while. And it is also such a privilege for me to be here today and to help moderate this discussion. And as Chris just so wonderfully told all of you that are watching with us, this is a participatory program. So we would love to hear from you throughout our discussion. One of the things I love about doing this panel discussions and ones that I've been on is that we want to be tired by the time we're done with this from answering your questions. So make sure you ask away and we will try to get to as many of those as possible. Chris is going to be moderating that and handing those over. So without further ado, I am going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Bree.
Hi, everyone. Hola. My name is Brianna Christophers. I am a fourth year MD PhD student at Cornell in New York City. Pronoun she.
Wonderful. Welcome. Edgar, let's go to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Edgar Lobaton, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at NC State.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And Nadmi, how about you?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Nadmi. My sign name is in on my cheek. I recently graduated in 2018 from SDSU in aerospace engineering.
Fabulous.
And I am apologizing, but I also am a program lead for Deaf Kids Co. currently. So thank you.
Wonderful. And Katura.
Hi, my name is Katura Holiday, and I will be the sign language interpreter for Nadmi today. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Katura. All right, so let's kick it off with a question that I think probably a lot of people have for each of you, is talking about just your career path and how did you get to where you are in science today? And so let's kick it off with Bree and just share a little bit about your story.
Sure. So I grew up in Miami, Florida, and I think my path in science got started in high school, really probably mostly in my senior year of high school when I was taking advanced placement biology, AP biology. And I had a really wonderful teacher who really encouraged me to pursue biology and to become a scientist. That wasn't really something that I knew was like a real path. I didn't know anybody who was a scientist, had a PhD. So I didn't know what that meant. I went to college at Princeton University in New Jersey. where, you know, I came into it being like, yeah, I'm going to be a molecular biology major and do science and, you know, really make this happen. And like I said, I had no clue what that meant. I had never been in a laboratory, held a pipette. Like I had no idea what was happening. But people said I should try to do research. So I joined a lab in my sophomore year of college. I worked for Rebecca Burdine, who studies zebrafish, which is not something that I knew people studied. And I spent 2.5 years studying heart development and trying to understand the like cellular movements that happen when the heart is forming, because surprisingly, heart development in zebrafish is fairly similar to what happens in the early stages of human heart development. And that was really my first off research experience, but I also got to shadow a neonatal cardiologist, so someone who treats patients, very, very tiny patients, newborns with cardiac conditions. And it was really a moment for me to see the things that I study in the lab really have meaning and matter, right? I was seeing children with the same conditions that occur when heart development goes wrong. So I learned from an event at the pre-med office that doing an MD PhD was a path. I didn't know people did that and that there are like combined programs to do that. It's a really long path. It's an 8-year training program, roughly. Some people take 9 years, some people take 10. So it's a big commitment. But I've loved it so far. Like I said, I'm in my 4th year, so I'm in my 2nd year of graduate school. And I'm loving it. You know, I get to go into the lab every day, do research. I did the first 2 years of medical school, so I learned a lot of stuff. And then I'll get to learn how to interact with patients, and really try to blend those two things throughout the rest of my career.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. There's so many little points. I'm like, oh, we'll get back to those in a little bit from your story. Thank you, Bree. Edgar, how about you?
Yes, thank you. So let me tell you, I guess, where I ended up first before I tell you the actual path. But I started, or right now, actually, I guess what I do as a faculty is I do a lot of work on machine learning, artificial intelligence, and robotics. And you know, getting started, I guess this was actually something that I was very passionate about since I was a little kid, starting from back in middle school, I think. My favorite TV show as a kid growing up was Transformers, the original cartoons, right, for anybody that remembers those. And, you know, as a very small kid, you know, maybe like 6, 7 years old, I wanted to have Transformers, but I couldn't really, you know, my family couldn't really afford it. This is back in Peru. That's where I'm originally from. So what I would do is I would just draw a little Transformer in a piece of paper, you know, like cut it out from there too, and then start folding it away, right, like a little origami piece, and that'll be my Transformer, right? So, you know, I think from that point on, I think my parents knew that I was probably going to be an engineer of some type. So they were right about that. But yeah, so after, you know, a few years in Peru, like I actually came to the United States when I was 15 years old. I finished up my high school. I landed in the Seattle, Washington area. I wanted to get a degree, an undergraduate degree. I think this is something that my parents already knew that, you know, because I had the passion for engineering, that I should follow some sort of like undergraduate degree. So I went for electrical engineering. Then during my second year actually of as an undergraduate student, I found out about this research opportunity in Puerto Rico to do research in mathematics. And I decided to sign up for that. I had no idea what research was. I just knew that it was going to be in Puerto Rico and, you know, beaches, so why not? So I decided to go over there. And I really was curious about mathematics because that's something that I really enjoyed very much as well too. So it was a combination of being right next to the beach. We were literally like about a block away from the beach. So every night we could just go and walk in there. But we were also working every day from 8 a.m. all the way to like midnight or 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, depending on how busy I guess the work was for that particular day. That I really sparked my curiosity for research. So I really wanted to pursue that as a career moving forward. So coming back to my studies in Seattle, I decided I wanted to pursue also a degree in mathematics. So I really enjoyed that. I started to find out more about what research was about and how I could pursue that. My advisors told me I needed to go to grad school for that. So I decided to go ahead and go to grad school. This was, I guess, at one point, in my life where I had to convince my family about what grad school was about, because once I was getting to the point that I was graduated, the big question is like, where are you going to work? How are you going to start making money at this point? It's like, why are you thinking about going to school and continuing studying? You can make money now. So I had to kind of make a financial assessment for my parents, and in particular my mom, saying like, well, see, this is how much I get paid now, but this is how much I would get paid if I get my degree and I go into industry. But little did she know that I was already thinking that I was going to stay in academia where we don't get paid as much. But well, anyway, I enjoy it. So that's the most important thing, I guess. So after that, I decided to go to Berkeley. I applied to a few places. I went for my degree. Actually, I started my PhD in mathematics, but ended up switching to electrical engineering because I realized that I did miss working with physical things a little bit more. And got my PhD from there. Decided to, after that, follow up with a postdoc. I ended up going to UNC Chapel Hill. I was there for a couple of years in the computer science department doing some robotics there. And then I switched to NC State as a faculty, about just over 10 years ago at this point. And I've been a faculty working on several things related to signal processing, machine learning, and computer vision, as I mentioned, and robotics in general. So thanks.
Wow, that's fabulous. Again, a bunch of little points I want to go back to that were just really awesome in your story there. Thank you for sharing that, Edgar. Nadmi, would you tell us your story?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much. And thank you, Edgar. I didn't even realize you went to Puerto Rico, which is where I'm from originally. So that was a nice tie-in. So sorry that we missed each other. We didn't have an opportunity to meet while we were in Puerto Rico, but maybe another time. So I was really fascinated in this career, I believe, starting in middle school. I was in a class of all hearing students. I was the only deaf student with no interpreter at that time. So I really had to assert myself in the classroom and try to find different ways to process and learn. And one of my science teachers provided a project on the solar system one time, what it looked like with all the planets, how things rotate and move and gravity. And I was just so fascinated with that. I thought that that basically the world was just Puerto Rico or just Earth, And when I realized we had other planets and solar systems and galaxies, I was convinced to research more about the sciences and become more involved. So I was part of science fairs in school. I believe I was in science fairs about 4 times. And my dad is involved in film and uses a lot of electrical engineering in his field as well. And so I would help him fix different things with cinematography. And I actually fixed one of the radios that had broken in our home. And that's how I decided to kind of mix the two, that I love math, I love science, but I also love engineering. And so that started my journey to be part of the sciences. And when I was a senior in high school, I realized that I really wanted to study aerospace engineering. I didn't see any other deaf in that field. I thought I was the only one. And so I wasn't sure if that would be something I would be able to do. But I was in the University of Polytechnic there in Puerto Rico and did study mechanical engineering at that time. And I did some research too with war robotics. And that's how I really became even more fascinated. But my passion was really about the sciences and studying aerospace engineering. So I ended up being selected as one of the top students to go to Florida, where they actually had some real life aerospace sciences happening there. And I was so excited to be a part of that program, which only propelled me further. So I ended up leaving Puerto Rico, moving to San Diego, California. and starting my schooling there. I enrolled for my BS at San Diego State University. I had to learn English and a different sign language, American Sign Language, which was different than Puerto Rican Sign Language. And then engineering has its own type of language. So I got involved with researching. One of our projects was like the honeycomb that we learned to research what they use at NASA as well. And after that, I ended up joining Deaf Kids Code. And I'm a program lead now to help motivate and inspire other deaf students to really be involved in STEM. So that's where I currently am.
Wow, that's fabulous. Thank you, Nadmi, for sharing that. So there were so many points, so I'm going to try to pick a few. But Edgar, you touched on something where you had to convince parents about your path. And I sort of want to ask that of all of you. How much convincing did it take? How did it go? How did you process that? And then how did your parents take it? Were they automatically on board, or was it sort of a gradual giving in, if you will, to what your passions and your dreams were? So Edgar, if you'd kick that off for us.
Sure, yes. Yeah, I think for me, it was more of a gradual, I guess, transition. It was not immediate. There was definitely a little bit of resistance at the very beginning. What I was very happy about, and it really helped me to get where I am right now, is that my family was familiar with what becoming an engineer was, right? In that sense, at least that they had seen it in TV, right? That's something that you see, I guess, in the everyday life. So they knew, like, oh, if you're interested in getting engineering, you see people that are actually work as engineers. So that's something that they saw as a path for me, right? They didn't know how to get there, of course, but that's something that once they were kind of motivating me and supporting me, then I actually had to learn on my own, like how to actually get to that point. But the PhD career part, the research path, that was completely new to them. So they had no idea. They didn't know like what it was about, or like what do you do with that as a degree, as a profession, like moving forward. So it was a little bit of educating for them, but also for myself as well too, because I began just with that experience in Puerto Rico, which was great. And that kind of guided me towards something that I wanted to pursue. But of course, I didn't know either exactly what research was. So as I was educating myself, I was trying to educate my parents. I think at the end, as I mentioned, like the turning factor was kind of making that financial kind of a chart saying like, okay, this is basically what's happening. This is how much I would get paid like after the degree. That also helped me convince myself, I guess, in some sense that, this was a good path for me too. But, I think that's one big theme, I think, in general, like for what I have seen for myself and my own path, is that a lot of these maybe were opportunities or decisions that I made, thankfully, because I was able to educate myself and try to find out, thankfully, because I had some other mentors or other people that helped me get some of that information, and that I was a bit the person that was kind of conveying that information also to my family, right?
That's awesome. Bree, did you want to chime in about this topic?
Sure. I think thankfully my family has always been very supportive, even if they don't understand the details of what I'm doing. So yes, they understand what a physician is, but same as Edgar, understanding what doing a PhD is or really doing research. I do have to spend some time explaining what it is and what it is that I might do in the future, right? So that's kind of been my experience with that. I think as I become better at like science communication, it's been easier for me to communicate to my family what it is I'm doing. Like I recently had a conversation with my dad about like the exact research that I'm doing for my PhD. And I think we both came away from it, with a clearer appreciation of like what was happening and like how you choose a specific topic and go with that and why it matters. I think it's been a little bit more complicated for my abuelas, my grandmothers, to understand what's happening. So they moved to the US in their 30s from the Dominican Republic to New York City. And for them to understand like the US education system, you know, their understanding of it is what my parents did. They understand what a physician does, but really doing research is like very far from their experience. So, and especially the fact that this is like a really long training path, they always ask me, so are you almost done? And I'm like, no, there's still a lot left to go. And the fact that I'll graduate with 2 degrees, like that's like not something that they necessarily understand, but you know, we're getting there.
That's awesome. But that hits a really good point that, you know, like the older generations might have a harder time understanding where we were headed. So Nadmi, you want to chime in on this topic? I know you went to Florida. I'm sure that was the first step in getting your parents to agree.
Right, exactly, it was. And I agree with what Edgar and Bree both stated as well. Similar experience to mine. Plus I'm deaf. So my parents have always supported me in my education. They've always showed me, you know, how to overcome various barriers that were in my path. But I'm one of 4, and I'm the baby. I'm the last of the children. And so for me to leave my home in Puerto Rico, my parents were like, really? You're the baby? You're gonna move away? You know, and how far are you moving? Wait, to California? Why not Florida? Why not pick a closer state? So that was kind of challenging, but they always believed in me. I've always been very independent. I love to learn. I love to be educated, but it was hard to leave my family, honestly, at that time. And that's, you know, I ended up graduating with my Bachelor in Sciences and telling them, you know, like, I'm the first deaf woman, the first Latina in this career from Puerto Rico. And so knowing that, my parents really were proud of me. And at the beginning, my mom would always say, why don't you just become an electrical engineer or a civil engineer? Just stay really local. You don't do anything where you have to go into outer space or anything. And I'm like, Mom, it's okay. It's okay. This is going to be fine. Of course, mothers always worry about their children. But now I am considering applying for grad school, which is going to be another thing. My parents and my grandparents have never gone to college in that way. And so they're always like, why don't you just start your career now? And why are you thinking about going to school even longer, you know? And so every time I tell them that I want to do that, they're like, well, yes, we do support you, but we want to make sure you're close because we want you to live close to us and, you know, that kind of thing. So that's kind of how life is, though. They understand it. They've supported me. And I think that's just the most important thing, is that they definitely are there to support me along my journey.
I think that's huge. And I've heard that from each of you about that support from family, even if they don't understand what we do, right? That is always amazing, I think. So, and Nadmi, you mentioned this a little bit, you know, the obstacles. So why don't we start with you? What other obstacles did you encounter as you were trying to go into this path? And are you still possibly encountering as you're moving forward in your career?
Yeah, well, really, there's been a lot of barriers and obstacles, starting when I was originally in Puerto Rico and then moving here to California. Communication has always been an obstacle for me. People don't understand how to communicate with a deaf person sometimes. And sometimes people don't want to invest the time, you know, even 5 minutes taking a little bit extra time to communicate with me. And so that causes some anxiety on my end sometimes, you know, should I go up to this person? Should I ask the questions? Are they going to be willing to invest the time? But I do want to show people my abilities and what I can do and not focus on what I can't. So I tell them, you know, I can speak for myself. And even if I prefer not to speak sometimes, I am very good with writing back and forth so we can communicate that way. Technology now is amazing in the 21st century. So we can always, you know, speak into different apps. We can text back and forth. I know Spanish as well, coming from Puerto Rico. So that's another language that I know. And I want to show them what I can do and show them my abilities, and that, you know, we can meet each other halfway, you know. They don't have to give up on me. And so sometimes it just takes a little bit more education for them to realize what I can do. I do have to do a lot of educating. That's a barrier as well, for them to be better understand and comprehend how to communicate with me, how to work with me, and to let them know that there's going to be other deaf people in the community that come after me that want to do the same thing. So this is really, you know, blazing the pathway for that.
That's awesome. Thank you for doing that. And I hope that there are many more deaf people that come after you. That is a wonderful thing to hear. Edgar, how about you? What other barriers did you encounter or still possibly encountering?
Yes. I was just thinking about that actually. And the first two things that came to mind were basically the two big changes that I had. First, moving from Peru to the United States. So that was a big change for me. In particular, the biggest issue, well, one of them was food, of course, you know, food is very different. But another one was also like the language barrier as well. I knew very little English when I first came from Peru. I even remember that when I landed to the airport, my mom's friend was actually supposed to like be waiting for me to pick me up and then take me to the apartment. But she had, I guess, gotten the time wrong of my arrival. So when I arrived there, nobody was there. So what happened is that I just waited. I had a number, right, like a phone number written down. So I started making phone calls from the payphone, you know, at the time, you know, using quarters, I guess, to make some phone calls. And nobody was picking up. So like, I thought that they actually forgot about me for whatever reason. So I was like, well, I need to make it somehow. So I decided to take a taxi from the airport. You know, I just had the address written down in a piece of paper, you know, so I took a taxi. I just kind of showed them where it was. I wasn't speaking. And they were just taking me in that direction, right? I had no idea how much it was going to be. They just took me. It was about an hour and a half ride. The driver, the whole time he was talking to me, I had no idea what he was saying. I just kept on saying, yeah, occasionally, right? It's like, okay. And we made it to the apartment, and you know, he dropped me off, and he was showing me basically how much it was, you know, the total toll. It was, I remember this, $50 with 35 cents, right? And I just reached into my pocket, and I knew already what happened is that I only had $50. That was my life saving at the time, you know, 15 years old. So that's all that I had. And I was just kind of showing to him, this is all that I have, this bill, $50. And he was like, it's okay, you know, just, you can go, right? So he just took basically my $50, and, you know, of course, nothing for him, but, you know, I did thank him as much as I could. I actually went out and I started walking around, got to the apartment. You know, I had a picture of what the apartment looked like. I had a number, kept on knocking on the door. Nobody was there. I think about 2 hours passed by. Nobody was reaching there. Thankfully, it wasn't too cold outside, so I was just waiting right outside the door. And then all of a sudden, my mom's friend arrived. She just saw me and she was like, "You're alive!" Ran to me, hugged me really hard, and be like, "Oh my God, I didn't know how I was going to explain this to my friend if I couldn't find you." And so later on, I guess we figured out what happened, you know, exactly that she had misread basically the arrival time. So she arrived like almost an hour later. She made it to the airport, but of course I wasn't there at that point anymore. She started looking for me everywhere. She, started to use my name in the loudspeaker, so all of the time you could hear in the entire airport somebody speaking in Spanish, right? Like, Edgar Lobatón, ¿dónde estás? ¿Dónde está? Por favor, acércate a esta mesa. Something like that, just calling for my name to approach to one of the ticketing tables. And she really had thought that she had lost her friend's son, so she didn't know exactly how that was gonna. She was gonna explain that, right? But that was just a story because it was just a big transition for me, like a big change, right? And I think for all of us, it's also sometimes these big jumps, right? Like big barriers that we need to overcome. But sometimes we just need to be adventurous, I guess, about it, and then just learn how to move forward. Getting here, I decided to actually start taking classes or learning the language, of course, as quickly as possible. Like I went to high school here, finished my last year. I was taking ESL classes, English as a second language at the time. But then also I started to take some courses at the community college, ESL courses in the community college as well too. Then all of a sudden, I think somebody in the community college realized that I was taking high school ESL and then community college ESL at the same time, which I guess I wasn't allowed to do that. So they told me that I had to stop going to the community college for that. So I stopped. But all of this helped me, and I tried to basically overcome the barrier as much as possible. So this was a big thing, I guess, in terms of perseverance, I guess, and trying to be as dedicated as much as possible, because I knew that my family were also making a lot of sacrifices for me to be able to make it to be here and have all the opportunities that I was going to have, like that. So yeah, just wanted to focus on that. Thanks.
Wow, Edgar, what a beginning. Not getting picked up. That's a great story though. Great perseverance story. Thank you for sharing that. Bree, you want to chime in on this one?
Sure. I guess I'll add something quickly different, although I relate to the stories shared thus far. For me, I think one of the biggest barriers or obstacles, I guess, has been more of a psychological barrier. Things like lack of representation, right? There are very few Latinos and Latinas and Latinx individuals in STEM, in medicine, and feeling as though it was a space that I could be in, especially going to, an institution that is not necessarily the most diverse for undergrad, and being the only Latina in my department in my year, and feeling as though, this was something that I could do, and that, people would relate to what I have experienced and where I grew up and whatnot. It's still something that, I deal with, although I think I've learned to be more comfortable with that, because it definitely has not changed throughout the different institutions that I've been in, the spaces that I've been in. And I think I feel a little bit more comfortable being able to speak my truth, my experience, and feel like, I have something to say and I should share that, no matter who's in the room. But it is very isolating. And for example, only 2% of physicians in this country are Latina women. And combining that with the fact that I'm also doing a PhD, which is not the most diverse path, especially in STEM, and to be at the intersection of that, I do credit, social media like Twitter to connect me with folks across the country and in the world who have done this and are now, in subsequent training, who are practicing physicians and researchers and scientists, professors, from similar backgrounds, and being able to feel like I have a spread out little scholarly family who can support me and who I've connected with, to do research with them and to talk to them about my experiences. So I think that's my piece of it.
No, that's really good. Thank you for sharing that and being so transparent about it, because that is something I think we all face. We are sort of the representatives where we are usually, right? For lack of using another word for that. Well, we've got some questions from our viewers, and what you were talking about, Bree, kind of leads to this question too. So, Edgar, you mentioned that your parents had seen professionals in STEM on TV or engineering, and media doesn't really portray a lot of diversity in STEM. So who were, or maybe where, did each of you find role models or examples for inspiration or motivation? So do you want to kick that one off, Nadmi?
Yeah, well, definitely it wasn't on TV. And really, there was no deaf person that I knew in the STEM field. So my role model was myself. I was like, I look up to myself. I will support myself when no one else does. I will motivate and encourage myself. I had to be a role model for myself. And then I knew I wanted to be a role model for the future generations of deaf who would come into the STEM field. It's very, very challenging. But to me, that was my goal, was to be someone else's role model. So, and so far growing up, I really didn't have anyone that was deaf that was in this field that I could look up to.
Wow, thanks. That's awesome. Hard, but awesome that you were able to do that. What about you, Bree?
Role models. I would say, at least as far as a woman in science, in the media, I would say Dr. Temperance Brennan, instances of a woman in science that I had seen. Someone very accomplished who runs this huge national lab and helps solve crimes and does things that you're like, how can someone do that? And I'm not pretty sure a lot of the things they show in the show are not scientifically sound, but at the I'm a high schooler, middle schooler, I didn't know what was happening. But the fact that she was able to use all of that expertise and bring it together to make things happen, I think was a good inspiration for moving forward.
I liked her too. How about you, Edgar? Because you mentioned, your parents seeing engineers at least, but what about going further? Any other role models?
Yes. So I think at least for me, early on, it was a little bit different. I didn't necessarily consider any role models at the very beginning. That's something that actually was introduced to me, I guess, a little bit later. But I think for me, it was mostly I decided that I wanted to do something, right? I found that one thing that I seem very interested in. Robotics was this thing, right? And I figured out that I wanted to work on that area. I wanted to do this one thing, right? So that was kind of what was driving me initially. Interestingly enough, I guess once I came to the States, of course, there was this whole cultural backlash and language and all of these things. So everything was kind of new. So all of the time I was immersed in this new environment where people didn't really look like me anymore, right? And it was an interesting experience, and I had to adapt and adjust to all of that as well too. But then through this experience that I mentioned in Puerto Rico, that's when I started to find other people that had very similar background to me. So people that came from different parts, of course, in Latin America, and that had this passion as well too for STEM in general, similar to what I had. So that's when I started to identify oh, there's this person that actually has a similar path as I do, and it has this passion towards the kind of things that I'm also interested in, and that those persons started to become my role models, right? Some of those mentors that I had through that program, and then after that, as everyone mentioned, Nadmi, Bria as well too, then that's when I also started to think about me becoming also a role model to other people, right? I realized I was very passionate about these things, but I also wanted to share it, right, and be able to motivate hopefully the next generations as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, we've got another question from our viewers, and I'll just open it up to whoever wants to answer this after I'm done reading it. So Linda asks, moving is so expensive for young people these days. How do you suggest those with very limited resources get the science experiences they need? So who'll take that one?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. Moving is so expensive for young people these days. How do you suggest those with very limited resources get the science experiences that they need? Especially, I think, if they don't have them where they are.
So I can make a few comments, I guess, related to that. Hopefully I'm answering the question directly as well. So I think for me, I was lucky enough that for my undergraduate career, I went to, or my studies, I guess, I went to Seattle University, a small private university, in the Seattle area. So my family were close by. So I didn't really have to move that far. And, every summer, basically, they would help me with a U-Haul and then get all the stuff out from my apartment, take it back to the house and things like that. So I was lucky in that respect. But then after that, when I went to grad school, that's when I actually had to move to California, right? And I think, again, I guess I go back to the fact that I had the support of my family, right, to be able to help me out. I didn't have much money to pay for a expensive apartment, so I ended up just getting a small a studio apartment. And then after that I had to share, of course, room with other people to stay with them too. And I think everyone going through grad school in some way or another kind of have these experiences as well too, right? But my family really supported me. They were the ones moving, of course, everything too. As soon as I got to the place, they were the ones helping me clean up the place to make sure that it actually looks like a home, and then they were the ones that would walk me around to the first grocery stores, right? So to help me get all the food that I wanted. And my mom would be like, okay, I'm just gonna cook right now enough food for you for 2 weeks, right? Just put it in the freezer and then just bring something down every day or something and start eating. And those are the things that I really appreciated for that. I think my family made it comfortable and then also affordable for me to be able to do some of that moving too. And then after that, because I ended up having experiences during the summers at different locations, and some of these experiences being to New York, for example, I had Puerto Rico, of course, as well too. Then going to UNC, and I moved to a couple of different places during the summers, and then ended up in NC State. One of the things I really learned is how to pack very efficiently, right? And pack really lightly, right? And when you're moving, you start realizing, okay, you really don't need all these things. These are your essentials, right? I used to joke around to move from one place to another with just 2 boxes. That's all that I needed. And then my family started to kind of make fun of me because now that I'm more settled here in North Carolina, I started getting more stuff, right? I now have a home and all of these things, right? So they're like, so what are you gonna do? Well, how's that gonna fit in your 2 boxes? And I'm like, I'm just making my boxes bigger. That's the only problem, right? So, but yeah, thanks.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I wanted to add something to that too, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So I wanted to say that when I moved, it was very challenging, but I was connected with vocational rehab, which helped assist in paying for my classes, my tuition, and everything. So signing up with them was very helpful. I also had to pay some things on my own, rent for the apartment, food, and things like that. So I did apply for some assistance, but that doesn't cover everything. San Diego is a very expensive place to live in California. Even just a studio or a 1-bedroom is very, very expensive. So sometimes I would, my parents would ask me, how much are you paying for things? And I would tell them the prices of things, $1,000 for this little studio. And they would say $1,000, that is crazy. Just move back home. You can just save a lot of money if you're here. We would support you. And I would tell them, yes, it is expensive, but education is my passion. And so I think in the very beginning, we sometimes think, okay, well, this is where I want to be, but we have to remember to take baby steps. Everything is a sacrifice, and just do what you can. I would apply for different things, research, tutoring, math and science tutoring to earn a little extra. I would find things to sell to earn a little extra. I'm a very independent person, and I don't like to ask to borrow, or I don't like to ask for help. I would rather figure it out myself. And sometimes I would think, what am I going to eat tomorrow? I don't know. I'm just going to have this bowl of cereal, or I'm going to save half of what I ate today and save it for tomorrow as leftovers. But we always survive, right? We always survive. So for me, I understood the sacrifices that it would entail. And I knew that sometimes things would be challenging. And because I knew that going into it, I was ready for those challenges. Of course, as a mom, she would always ask, what did you eat today? What did you have for lunch? What did you drink today? I'm going to give you money for this. And I said, Mom, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm making it work. And sometimes $20, that wouldn't hurt, And then, of course, she would send $200. I know you need more. And I would tell her, well, thank you so much. But I think mothers have that intuition. Sometimes they know when their kids need something. And thankfully, I had that support. I'm not a mother myself, but she would always tell me, when you're a mother, Nadmi, you will understand my feeling, when your kids move somewhere else, especially to another place in the States. But I really thank my parents for their support to this day and just being independent and figuring it out myself. Yeah.
I'd like to add something super quick for, I guess, like younger folks who before college or anything like that, as far as being exposed to science and things locally. I think, going to museums and things as, the folks sponsoring this. And often there'll be programming around that, and you'll get exposure that way. A lot of colleges, universities, community colleges will put on, free programming as science outreach for middle school, high school students, even elementary school kids. And I think that's a way to get earlier exposure. And then, the internet makes things very accessible, right? Like there's this conversation happening right now and we're all in different places. And there's a lot to be learned on places like YouTube and sites from nonprofits and other organizations and things. So I think that's one way to start getting the next generation into these things, even in ways that are inexpensive or really completely free, before, inspiring folks before they realize that these are paths that they can take.
Absolutely, Bree. Thank you for adding that. I also think internships and shadowing individuals, reaching out to somebody that you think might have an interesting career and just saying, can I hang out with you for a couple of days or volunteer and help with different things? There's also so much citizen science going on these days that you can find online anywhere all over the world. So there's a lot of different opportunities, and you're right about the internet. It has brought us so much closer, done so many wonderful things. So I've got a couple more questions. The next one is, what is the most rewarding part of your roles or jobs in STEM? Who'd like to kick that one off?
I can start. For me, I just feel inspirational in research and working with deaf kids code. I really felt inspired as well. That makes me remember and reflect when I was a young kid, and I didn't have a mentor at that time, but I wish that I did. And so now as a mentor, I realize the value in that. Technology now is so much different than it was when I was a kid. We're so advanced in technology. It's amazing. And so taking the time to invest in this next generation is rewarding, because I don't want them to go through the same frustrations that I experienced. I don't want them to only have to rely on themselves. But that's why I love traveling to various schools, especially schools for the deaf. I do a lot of motivational speaking for deaf youth. And it's inspiring me to see the next generation, honestly. I've never wanted to be a teacher. My mom's a teacher. My fiance is a teacher. My sister's a teacher. There's a lot of teachers in my family. I never wanted to be a teacher. But I think that there's a way to teach without specifically being a professor. Thinking of STEM, and not just teaching children to memorize vocabulary and words, but doing hands-on activity seeing the equipment in front of you, touching it, doing it, moving it, helping you understand and be a leader in this field is so inspiring. To me, I gain the greatest satisfaction in helping the next generation. And I've learned so much from them. They've actually taught me. So I really believe improve as educators, our approach with the younger generation, learning how to accommodate their needs going forward. And at the same time, just having fun with it. We should be able to make STEM an enjoyable thing for the next generation. And so I drive a lot of satisfaction in doing that.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Nadmi. Edgar, did you want to add to that?
Yes, if I can. Yeah, I mean, I think there's basically three things that I really enjoy out of my day-to-day, I guess, work. One of them, Nadmi kind of briefly mentioned that as well, to touch base on that, which is the fact that working with other people, working in particular with the students, people that you're teaching in some ways, right, is very rewarding. Being able to see that light bulb kind of like, light up once you're trying to explain some of these concepts. It's very rewarding overall. So that's one. But the other two are, for example, the fact that I get to work on problems that actually matter. Right, like things that I think that are actually gonna make an impact in society, and these are like great, a great feeling, right? That it gives a little bit of meaning to the work that I'm actually doing, right? Like that's why I really care about this work, of course. And finally, the last thing, which is a little bit more associated with the fact that I'm doing research, perhaps, is that I get to work on problems that challenge me in the sense that require a lot of creativity as well, too. Right, so I'm not doing kind of repetitive things, but I'm actually doing things that require me to come up with like smart kind of intelligent solutions. Sometimes like ways around like big challenges to try to come up with some of these solutions to these problems that actually matter. Right, so that aspect of creativity is something that I always enjoy, and I always wanted to keep as part of my life and my career. And yeah, and I'm happy that that's part of it right now.
How about you, Bree?
Honestly, I feel like both of them have covered what I would have said. So, take that as a common theme, I think, about careers in STEM.
That's wonderful. Okay, so we have another question. It says, a student at GMS wants to know what the challenges were coming to the US. Who wants to take that one?
I guess I could get started. Oh,
sure. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks. Yeah. So I think it did mention a few of those things already. I just wanted to add a couple of things. So the language part was, of course, a big barrier for me as well. I think the cultural shock was a big one. One thing that maybe me specifically coming from Peru and South America, like people look a little bit different, at least in my surroundings, in my neighborhoods at the time. So when I first came to the United States, actually my visual cortex had to kind of adjust a little bit to things as well too. Like, everyone, to be honest, looked almost the same to me. I couldn't really like take one person apart from another person. So that's something that I actually had to adjust to. Like that was interesting, actually, like a completely new experience for me as well too. And one thing that I experienced coming in here too, this was this global kind of exposure to all these different cultures and be able to learn about like all these different countries, all the different continents and all these people all together, right, at the same time. So that was a big eye opener for me as well. So those are some of the big challenges that I had to do. Another big challenge, of course, was food too. we get to eat very differently, and I did miss quite a bit, and I think I still do, right? Like the cooking for my family, of course, that they would do, but now that I'm living by myself, like cooking for my family and my country as well too. Unfortunately, I don't have that much time to cook, so sometimes it's just sandwiches, I guess, that I eat. But like the nice ceviche from Peru, like it's something that I love to have like more often. And these are things that depending on where you are, you get a completely different experience, right?
I wanted to add to that as well. And I totally agree with Edgar. The cultural shock is so different from Puerto Rico to here, is just a huge difference. And it's because, I was part of a Spanish culture and I'm moving to a predominantly English culture. So I had to adjust that. I had to learn to read and write and speak English. I also originally used Puerto Rican Sign Language, which is very different than American Sign Language. So when I moved here, I'm like, whoa, this is a completely different sign language. I'm going to have to learn a different vocabulary here in ASL. And also the deaf population is different. There's so many people that assume that I'm white because of the lightness of my skin, but I'm like, no, I'm not white. I'm Latina. I'm Puerto Rican. Sometimes I speak Spanish and I have that Puerto Rican accent and people are like, whoa, wait, you're from where? Where are you from? You're not from here? Oh, and you can speak. You're a deaf person who can speak. And wait, you have a Puerto Rican accent? Wait, what's going on? So there's a lot of education. And I feel like there's so many different hats that I wear being here in California. And it's not like those barriers went away. I still speak with a Puerto Rican accent when I talk. I don't have time all the time to explain to everybody, okay, well, I'm from here and I moved here when I was this age. And I try to be patient, but sometimes you don't always have a lot of time to explain to people your background. So that's one thing. And I agree with Edgar about the food. Oh my goodness. Here, even now, when I try to cook and I follow my mom's recipes, it still tastes different. It's not the same as the Puerto Rican food I'm used to. And maybe I just miss my mama's, cooking, and she'll always tell me, okay, I'm going to have to send you my ingredients because maybe your American ingredients in California are different. I think the brands are different. I'm like, oh my goodness. So she will literally send me packages of different seasonings and ingredients, and I still taste the difference. It's not my mom's authentic Puerto Rican food. I miss my abuela's food. I miss my mom's food. So those are huge, huge barriers that I've just kind of had to overcome, learn to live with.
How about you, Bree?
So I was born here in the States, so I've had a little bit of a different experience, but I think a lot of similar sentiments shared, just hearing stories from my abuelas, from my parents. So I think for me, it's been more of a secondhand experience and learning from a lot of my friends who are like first generation immigrants. So
yeah. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left, and I always love it when people ask me this question. So if you could go back and tell your younger self, give your younger self any advice about going forward or things you're going to have to deal with or preconceived notions you're going to run into, what would that be? What advice would you give to your younger self? So who wants to kick that one off?
I can start. I would really tell myself and anyone, any child, whether you're hearing or deaf plus with various disabilities or anyone in general, try to find someone that can mentor you. It's so important to have someone that you look up to and can relate to and talk to. We all need a support system. And it's really important to have someone that you can go to for help, for advice, who has lived experience. Sometimes when you just try to figure it out all by yourself, it can be very frustrating and overwhelming and can lead to anxiety and distraction, and you don't want to give up. When you have a support system, you can hone in on what you want to do and fulfill those goals. There's been so many times when I felt really, really down, and it's been an emotional roller coaster to be in this field, but it's so important to find that support system when you're young and find someone who is in the field that you want on them for that support during your journey.
Thank you.
I can go.
Yeah.
I think if I had to tell my younger self something, it's that it's okay to speak up and to be bold and ask for what you need. I think I spent a lot of time being scared is not the right word, maybe intimidated, and feeling that, I needed to sit back and Someone else would probably say it, so why would I need to say it? And I think that's something I've learned as I've grown older. And, I think my younger self would have benefited from that advice.
That's good. How about you, Edgar?
Yeah, I guess something that I would tell myself and other people as well too is that just thinking about your background, just